Welcome to the Privateers podcast. My guest today is Rui Morais, CEO of Dis-Chem, one of South Africa's leading retailers in the healthcare space and expanding their reach in the healthcare space. Rui, you've had a front row seat at Dis-Chem as CFO, now CEO, through the listing all the way to where it is now. How did you get into Dis-Chem?
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, so I mean, it's quite a story. I if I think back, it's been 18-year relationship with the brand, and the story, I guess, is quite interesting. In actual fact, during my articles, and I'm not entirely sure if I can say this, but I'll say it anyway. But during my articles, I started a figurine business. A friend of mine and I started a figurine business. I mean, as you typically do, everyone backs themselves as an entrepreneur at some stage, and it was centered around acquiring the licensing rights from Pirates and Chiefs. And the interesting thing was that in South Africa, like, the clubs own the play imageries, which is quite interesting. Like in football, globally, that's not the case. Like the players own their own imagery, but we were able to produce like Pirates and Chiefs figurines, and we thought it was a fantastic idea, and we had them manufactured overseas. And we had this product, and we didn't really have a route to market, which is something that I guess at the time was completely underestimated. So we decided that we only had a few options. We weren't going to build like a logistics infrastructure. We didn't have the capital, so we went to this business called RNA, which was in the process of distributing magazines into the CNAs of the world. And the way that worked is, as much as they would list your product, you still needed to, as a product, engage with a retailer. And that was actually my first kind of interaction with Dis-Chem. I was sitting in front of Ivan, trying to convince him that this made a lot of sense in the snake run. And I think I got exposed to just the nature of his entrepreneurial mind. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, I guess we got the audit, which was strange because I was then put on the audit. And it was quite confusing because Ivan used to walk into the office and see me there in my audit capacity and talk to me about the figurine stuff. So I think it was an odd but a very cool type of engagement with the brand. And then I guess 2 years into the audit relationship, Ivan had decided to move what was a 25 store portfolio into SAP, but I guess a generic version of SAP, which never really made any sense. I mean, I think his vision or his intuition was that he needed a solid system to be able to grow, but the fact that it was generic it was crippling from a decision-making perspective, because every time they needed a technical change, there was this forum of retailers that needed to vote on, which was completely counterintuitive to how Ivan ran his business. And the one day he called me and said, look, the FD is resigning. He thinks the brand is in trouble, and would you like to join me? I'd already had this inherent passion for retailing. It was in me. I knew I loved retail, and I guess I knew fundamentally that there was nothing wrong with the brand. I mean, the brand was exceptional. What Ivan had established was so solid. You just needed to walk into the stores on a Saturday and you could see that the potential of the brand, but there were lots of system challenges. So I obviously joined him, and that was where the relationship was formed. It took a while, but eventually we got SAP sorted out, and then the brand grew from strength to strength, and that's actually how I joined. It's a strange strange story in some way, but it was a very cool way to join the brand.
Strange, but and some would say fortuitous, but not really. It is about like-minded individuals meeting up and understanding. Ivan is inherently an entrepreneurial body, and he would have identified that in you. Right, when was that you joined? What year was
so that? Was in it was the back end of 2010. So I joined as, I suppose, FD at the time, and then 6 years later we listed the business. I remember listing the business. It was also the time where we opened up our 100th store. Yeah. So even between when I joined and the 6 years, to go from that kind of base to 100 stores was exceptional growth. Obviously, it's compounded. We're north of 300 now, but
incredible.
But yeah, I mean, I think since then, it's been a whirlwind.
You've had a lot of successes along the way, personal successes. I know you were a winner of the Young CFO Award some time ago. That must Must have been a nice feather in your cap.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think the recognition is cool. Naturally winning anything is cool. I'm a super competitive individual, so
Anyone who knows you knows that's correct.
I get anxiety when I'm put into an award because I hate losing, right? But it is cool. The recognition is cool. I think for me, two things have changed in my relationship with the brand. Is initially I joined the brand because I was super passionate about retail. I've developed a passion for like healthcare delivery and purpose, as I've seen the brand kind of touch the South African healthcare consumer. And the other thing is that, like, from a recognition perspective, you start to get that recognition from seeing the changes that you make and how they touch people. And I think that warms my heart more, as cliched as it may sound, than any sort of like other recognition, like just seeing the differences that you make, or seeing kind of the way that you think about like a healthcare ecosystem, and then seeing it actually impact like another individual is very, very cool.
You get to feel that impact directly.
Absolutely,
firsthand.
yeah.
And one of the things, Roy, that drew me to your story is we do a work with lots of founders, and Ivan is the quintessential founder of a business. His name is synonymous with the brand, and we've seen a succession. And a successful succession that you've taken over as CEO. What are the lessons that you think other businesses could learn from how you got your succession plan right at Dis-Chem?
So yeah, I mean, the succession thing is played out well. I mean, I would be lying if I said it wasn't difficult.
Sure.
I think both Ivan and myself underestimated how tough the actual succession transition was and was going to be. For many reasons. I think for a successful succession to happen, if I now look back at it, there needs to be an openness and a fundamental understanding that your decision making as shareholder and your decision making as executive are two different things.
Yes.
And I think Ivan intuitively did that. I mean, obviously it was a family-run business. There were other options outside of myself, but he made the best decision for the brand. I think, well, I mean, in his mind, and hopefully it plays out like that. But I think one of the things that was super difficult for him, and in turn difficult for the transition, was then to divorce what that meant from his role as executive.
Yes.
And it's simple things like when you give away. When you give away the power, as he sometimes calls it, you also don't necessarily understand the consequence of that. And it's small things like people leave you off an email, like those things, as small as they are. Like when you're going through a transition like that, that's highly sensitive. You can understand how hurtful that can be, and I think both of us kind of underestimated that, and. I had very specific ambitions for the brand. I think what the brand has done and what is built has got much greater legs than just retail pharmacy, which is now proving to be the case. But at the same time, Ivan's view of the brand was Ivan's view of the brand. So it was very tough. I mean, now it's good. I mean, one of the things that has been very cool, and I was asked the question actually yesterday, is like we've started this innovation hub, and like we've created newness and energy into a brand that was kind of entrenched in decade-old pharmacy. And the question was simply like, how did you do it? Like, how did you, like, cross-generationally or cross-eras get people to work in the same direction? And the truth is, like, there was a lot of lift on culture and we did a lot of work there, but the reality is, like, everyone ultimately believed in the purpose of the brand. And that was really the thing that allowed us to navigate the transition, is that you could take yourself out of the chaos at some point in time and say, okay, but like the brand has got a purpose. Like, are we doing the right thing for the brand? And that kind of, it went sideways a little bit, but that's ultimately kind of how we managed to get it straight.
Purpose, such an important word in business. And I know you write quite a lot about your business. You post a fair bit on LinkedIn about it. And that is clear that it comes through this whole purpose, culture. What is our intention with our client? But how do we improve the lot of our client base in there? How do you as a leader get that message through the staff, get it through the organization to say, this is what our purpose is?
So I mean, I think one of the scariest things when I transitioned into the role 2.5 years ago is I felt that if we were going to do justice to the brand playing a role in a healthcare ecosystem as opposed to just retail pharmacy, like we needed a different energy, and as such we needed a different culture. So like we purposely moved like our brand positioning from pharmacists who care to better health starts here. But in essence, that's very theoretical, right? I mean, like, you can get a marketing team to do that. You can do very cool stuff, consumer facing stuff, but the heart of the business, the individuals that do justice to the brand, like they need to believe it. So what we did is we went through this culture process, and I mean, like it was really interesting for me, because as we were looking at vendor options, there was this vendor called Blueprints, which was run by a guy called Guy Martin, who himself is a bit of a crazy individual. And if he watches this, I'm sure he will acknowledge that he is. But the interesting thing and his pitch initially was, I can quantify culture for you. So I was like, well,
that's interesting.
That's interesting, right? That's an unquantifiable thing. You can feel it, but how do you do it? And what he did is he essentially sold us this concept of a culture formula. And essentially what he did is he ran an election-based poll into every single individual in our organization, so north of 20,000 people, and just simply asked them, like, when you see the brand, what do you want the brand to do more of, and what do you want the brand to do less of? And like making the decision to go in that direction was actually super scary and made me incredibly vulnerable, because
you don't know what feedback
you don't know what feedback is, and what if the feedback was so fundamentally different to the brand positioning that you had set out, right? I think when we landed on the culture formula, what was very interesting was that perceptively every single staff member, or certainly the aggregation of staff, like knew that the brand was capable of more. So they spoke about concepts like, we think the brand can disrupt healthcare. We think that it requires innovation. And all of those culture formulas were built into icons, and they effectively were depending on the prioritization of the thing that was an icon. So what you do more of and what you do less of, they were formulated. So they were either cubed or they were square rooted. And the reality is that the measure or the number that you arrive at is irrelevant. But the iteration of that number going forward is very relevant. Like if your culture formula is 1.08, it means nothing.
Yeah.
But if that same culture moves from 1.08 to 1.5, like the thing that you're doing is you're improving, or you're doing the things that your employee base wants. And I guess that energy gave us almost the confidence to say, okay, like that's the staff was supporting of that purpose, and then to really market the purpose. And what we have now is we have like this new energy as a function of the staff acknowledging that the way that they see the brand, which is being built into culture, and they can see that fundamentally as leadership we are doing the things that they want us to do, and how that aligns with the purpose is kind of, in my mind, like shifted everyone to move like succinctly in line with what we're trying to do as a brand. So that culture piece of work was very, very important to me. And I mean, we landed on Blueprints as an organization, and that it's been so valuable in the way that it's played out. And I think once you have that purpose, then it's one less thing to worry about. Like, I mean, especially even now when we recruited for this innovation hub that we call X-Bigly Labs, like if you think about trying to recruit like millennials, for example, like, you fundamentally need to believe in a purpose, right? If you don't believe in the fact that you can create value in something that's bigger than you, like you lose the interest. So yeah, I mean, I think it's all structured and set up relatively well. It's still new, but it's moving in the right direction.
I mean, it's one thing having all the marketing out there and all the storytelling about this is our culture and this is our purpose. People have to believe it. Got to believe that authentically as leaders you are delivering that from a business perspective. In fact, we had Greg Solomon here recently, former CEO of McDonald's South Africa. He had a fantastic expression for it, and that was that trust and respect from your employees will result in impact. And I thought that was like bang on point. So you've clearly got buy-in from your team around that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really interesting, and like it sounds like quite complex when it's described, but it's actually so simple. I mean, some of the things that people wanted to do less of and things that people wanted to do more of are things that sometimes you take for granted, like something simple like backstabbing, like or discrimination, like the negative pull or the pullback when you allow that in a culture to happen on the ability of the employees and the motivation of the employees to move along with you as a brand, like it's significant. Or the simplicity of, what was very interesting, the simplicity of like recognition and reward.
Yes.
Like there's this perception that, reward, and I mean we've done it in the way that we've prioritized our employee. We talk about our employees as priority customers. They very much are. Everything that we shape in the organization almost gets led through an EVP lens. So we test everything we bring to market through our employee base. That came out of the culture, and that's been very well received. But when we started the process, like people just wanted to be thanked. Like something so simple, like just a simple acknowledgement to just remind them that like the job that they do is important to the purpose of the brand. And even like a simple thing that we ran out through the business units, like Thank You Thursdays, for example. Like it got so much traction. It was just like a breath of fresh air into an organization that at the time needed it.
Yeah.
So it's the simple things.
And this transition of leadership, how was that felt within the organization? What would people have felt in that transition from Ivan to yourself?
I think a lot of that was absorbed by the culture change. So I think naturally, I mean, my view naturally is that like humans are inherently resistant to change, right? It's just, I mean, it doesn't matter what study you look at. I mean, you can look at neuro leadership courses. The reality is that 80% either resist or never change. You get those forerunners who maybe the 20% who adopt change quickly. But initially, when change is put on someone, like your resistance is why. Like why am I doing? Why is this needing to change? What needs to
always
change?
Always
perceive it negatively. And I think that was the risk across the transition. I mean, it's quite intimidating transitioning from what is a generational retailer. I mean, there's maybe been 3 or 4 Ivans in South African retail history. So, I had to be relatively confident with the things that I brought as an individual and how I saw the brand differently and how that perceptively played out into the environment. So the first thing that I really did truly want to do was establish a culture that served the purpose of the organization, whatever that was. And I think that was, like I said, my most scariest time because, I didn't know how far apart those two worlds were, if I was honest. I had a view for the direction of the brand, but I had no perception of what the staff thought it was. And I think that helped a lot with the transition. I mean, naturally, there were camps, if you think about it, like, people that were cynical maybe about the changes that I was making. Maybe they thought they were too ambitious. I also think that when you build a business, and it's appropriate for the time, but when you build a business, you have to be prescriptive in your leadership, right? And what I mean by that is lots of instructions and people inherently start to execute. So I had a whole bunch of staff that were excellent executors, poor thinkers, not because they couldn't think, but they were never encouraged to.
Yes.
Because the standardization of the brand was so important. Like, I control it so centrally, you deliver on what I say. Absolutely appropriate for when you're building a brand.
Phase, yeah.
But obviously, as you mature, that kind of transition needs to change. Like, you can't do that with resources of that are millennials, that are empowered, that are incredibly academic, that have a view on the world, right? It just doesn't work. It's not the environment they're going to work in. So that shift needed to happen. And I guess when I talk about two camps, in a world where you're used to taking instructions, where you're now forced to think or give your opinion, that starts to become very uncomfortable. And as soon as it becomes uncomfortable, like, you default to the past. And again, that culture piece of work had a role to play in saying it's okay. Like, we're not, no one is being tainted by the change. We're just working slightly differently. So there's still a little bit of that. There will always be, but that was probably the toughest thing in the transition.
And how would you describe your leadership style?
I mean, it's for me, like, I feel like I'm collaborative, or maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, but I feel like I'm collaborative. I mean, there has to be a balance. So like, I think it's disingenuous for someone to say like, I'm collaborative, I'm a leader, my decisions are always inclusive. Yes, the decisions can be inclusive, but at some point in time, you need to make a decision as well, right?
Sometimes you need to make a very unpopular decision.
Yeah, and those decisions are unpopular, and I think the one thing that I try and encourage is complete transparency. So like, when I say, like, it's important for me, it's important to take my senior leadership team on the journey. Because when I do make the decision that is maybe unpopular, at least they understand the context of why. They may not agree, but they understand the context, and they don't feel like, I haven't taken their input into account. Because if that's the case, I think that becomes disempowering. So I do think I'm collaborative as a leader. I think the other thing is I think naturally I'm able to reconcile the individuals to the purpose of the organization, which is important, and it's something I focus a lot on. Like also for ensuring that I have the appropriate leadership team. Like if you don't align with the purpose, I think it's only a matter of time before like it moves past you, right? So like you need to have an ambition to build value through the purpose of the brand.
Yes.
So that would be probably how I describe my leadership style.
Ray, do you read many business books or leadership stuff?
I don't probably read as much.
Okay.
I guess it's a limitation of time. I do enjoy actually reading books that are outside of business, but are around like strength of mind, for example. And typically they manifest in like guys that have done things that have never been done. So, whether it's triathlons or whether it's like climbing the 7 peaks and why I found it interesting is just like the mindset that you need to have to be able to endure some of the difficulties that come from making the decision to do something that no one's ever done.
Yeah.
Like I found that super interesting and how people are able to manage that. So I enjoy those type of books, and I'm sure you do get it in leadership books. But I would typically read a leadership book if I'm interested in the story of the brand, like Shoe Dog, which is the Nike book.
It's probably my favorite book.
It's such a cool book, but I'm very interested in the brand. So like those would be the ones that I'd be interested in.
Me too. I love Shoe Dog. In fact, just before you got here, I had asked, is there a copy of Shoe Dog floating around? Because I'm sure you'd
I would have appreciated that. I would have made a comment. No, it's a super cool book. Such an interesting story as well.
It's what I love about that is that whole entrepreneurial spirit, that competitive nature, finding an element of passion that he was passionate about that part of the business and the sport and everything that evolved around it, and just the triumph through all the adversity that he faced.
Yeah, it was incredible. And the other thing that's super interesting for me about that book is like, and it's maybe not so obvious, but like how whatever he did through all of those difficult times, like he never let go of the fact that he knew that he needed to innovate.
Yes.
And sometimes you can forget about that because you get so caught in the detail, because innovation, if you think about it, you have to upfront an investment in some way or form. Like it has to be, like that's like empirical in the way that you think about innovation, and like he never let that go. And if you think about the brand today, like they still continue to innovate. Like it's part of the thing that makes them different.
Their DNA.
That is part of their DNA. So that is also my favorite book.
Oh, fantastic. And any lessons that you might have taken from that story that you go, oh, you know what, I think I'm going to apply this principle in
So the concept of innovation is definitely a lesson I took from that book. Because especially in the listed space, like I mean, if you have many conversations with people who are very short-term natured in the way that they think about the business, which naturally means that as soon as you invest ahead of any kind of return, you have to explain yourself, and it's okay. It can get demotivating, and in some instance you think, geez, why am I doing this? I could just not invest and deliver great numbers, and like I'd be the darling child of the market. But the truth is, then you shortchange your ability to build what you intend building. So, like I think one of the lessons I took out of that book is in all his adversities, like he never let go of the thing that he thought would make the brand different, which was innovating and holding that competitive advantage. And he was fundamentally right. Like, as you said, it still sits within the DNA of the brand. And I would never like I would never want to be in a position where like I've passed up the ability to innovate or create impact or purpose on, you know, the healthcare of South Africans because I'm worried about what the next income statement is going to look like. I mean, obviously I have responsibility, but you know, there's purpose and then there's managing for the short term. They can be very, very different things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're too focused on just your short-term results, you're never going to create
Yeah,
sustained
100%.
value.
Yeah.
We obviously operate in a very regulated industry, the whole healthcare, national health insurance, and all of those things. What's your outlook on the sector?
So, I mean, I guess when we thought about like the brand purpose, we speak about ourselves as South Africa's wanting to be South Africa's healthcare authority, and like I was quite purposeful in saying, okay, cool. I mean, like anyone can speak about them being a healthcare authority or any authority, but what characteristics come with you being authoritative? Like, what do you do? Like, what if you go and look at authoritative brands like an Apple around the world? Like, what makes them that? And we actually went and had like a global scan and said these are the brands that are authoritative in the industries, and like let's look at like similar characteristics. And they were very interesting characteristics, and one touches regulation. So you need to compete at scale, which is why we're so ambitious about our store network.
Scale's important.
Scale's important. You've got to be relevant. If you're going to be authoritative, you've got to be relevant to everyone. You need to innovate. Like, so you've got to pull the industry with you. And there's a few, but tied closely to innovation is how do you think about regulation when you innovate? And if you think about South African healthcare regulation, South African healthcare regulation needs to adapt to allow the funding part of healthcare to be more flexible, to ensure that the private sector, which is well capacitated, and I'm not necessarily only talking about retail pharmacy and clinics, I'm talking about hospitals, to allow the capacitated sector of South African healthcare to service more state patients. So if you think about the landscape of healthcare funding in South Africa, prior to our introduction of medical insurance, there was two options. There was scheme, which has PMBs, which by implication mean that those are prescribed minimum benefits. So by implication means that the starting point on medical scheme is very high and unaffordable for half of South Africa's population, or you rely on the state. So there was no tool, and certainly nothing that the regulation allowed, to say, well, how do we create flexibility in how people think about funding so you can get 12 million South Africans that are employed, uninsured because of the affordability levels, consuming private care because private's got capacity and now they're reliant on the state.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, what was happening is there was so much demand and so little capacity on the state that the 12 million people who couldn't afford it was touching the private sector. And because the private sector were under pressure from a service provision perspective, they were charging these people more. So, I mean, you think about it in a very simple example. If you go to the doctor and you're on Discovery, you pay X rate. If you go to the doctor and you pay cash, you know, which is equivalent of people who didn't have schemes and who couldn't rely on the state, you pay more. And like, that's so counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive.
It's so counterintuitive. So I think what NHR has started to do is try to address that from through a primary care lens led. It will take longer than a decade even to make some influence into. I mean, we're working with the state around how do you price, how do you get like multiple providers or services in the sector to work together, like to be able to pull. It's very, very complex. But I think the point is that like there needs to be this appetite for public and private collaboration, you know, for NHR to work. And as a brand, our responsibility is to go and pull the funders and pull the regulator along to say, okay, like if we want to do the job of providing healthcare to South Africans, you need to help us shape, or we need to shape regulation differently. Like this concept of medical insurance being stagnated is crazy. Like there's demand, there's more than 1.5 million people who are now servicing this product. Like there needs to be more competition in the space. Like this exemption framework that precludes other entrants into is crazy. Like let's service healthcare in South Africa. So it's an interesting space. It's highly regulated. It needs to adapt. But at the same time, like we think we have a job to do in pulling the regulator on the journey, if we're true to the ambitions of being an authority in the space.
I mean, you've certainly evolved from Dis-Chem as a pure retailer. You want to talk through some of the other things that you've got, like your loyalty programs and the insurance?
Sure. So, I mean, we launched medical insurance. That was, so we always had this ambition, or like I'd always imagined this ecosystem, and like fundamentally the ecosystem was two things. It was, we knew that we were the entry point of healthcare, right? So we knew that like clinics, pharmacies, they're the first thing that you touch when you touch healthcare, or potentially could touch healthcare. We knew we had this, I suppose, those funding mechanisms that were schemes in South Africa that had given people who could afford a choice. And I mean, I often speak about the concept of, or the difference between choice and access. Choice isn't access. Access you can curate access. So you can force someone to do a specific thing, to consume healthcare in a specific way. You can take choice away, but you can very much deliver access, right? And so we had this world where we knew we were the service provider. We knew that from a funding perspective, there was no curation of how you touch healthcare. So, and as a function of that, there was no affordability for most of South Africa. And because of that, we went into medical insurance, which is obviously much lower price point. It doesn't have the hospital play other than in the case of emergencies, but it's very rich in out of hospital cover, which is where we play. And in theory, then you control the way that you fund and deliver into the product, right? So that is a true ecosystem, because you can design benefits, you can reduce cost as a function of providing some of the margin that you collect as a service provider into the hands of the consumer, and by reducing value, you can open up access. So that was the first entry point. You know, that business is now 3 years old. It's going really, really well. It contributes profitably to our retail segment. You know, we the biggest medical insurer in the country. And then, like, naturally, one of the next things is like, what other financial services baskets do you have?
Yes.
And we went into a portfolio of life insurance products. And again, you know, criticized a little bit, you know, like it felt a little ancillary. But if you think about life insurance through a healthcare lens, it makes a lot of sense, right? So anyone who's taken life insurance, for example, who's got chronic conditions, knows that as soon as you go through that application process, like, your premium gets loaded. There is no understanding as to whether you're adherent to your medication, like what your underlying risk is. You just get loaded. So many people who have chronic conditions, which are an enormous amount of people in South Africa, they just can't afford life insurance, which, you know, life and health are so intrinsic to one another. And what we were able to do there, interestingly enough, working with Gen Re, which is Berkshire Hathaway owned, which is Warren Buffett, they're global reinsurers, and they took our health data and they said, because they reinsure our product, and they said, well, actually what you guys are doing by keeping people adherent to their medication, you're reducing the risk of mortality and morbidity, which we will price into your product. And the product that we have in the market gives chronic people standard cover. It obviously requires them to engage and take their medication, but, you know, it creates affordability in a life product through a healthcare lens. You know,
you speak a lot about this holistic approach to health, and you can't just do one aspect.
You can't just do one
This
aspect.
talks exactly to that.
Yeah, and then I guess the last piece was just like, I'd always felt that there was this opportunity to create a reward program that, because in retail, one of the things that I guess retailers have done is they've cemented the understanding of what a reward is in the consumer mind. So like, everyone understands a discount, right? It's like everyone understands a discount. You don't have to educate a discount. And when we launched medical insurance, like, one of the things that I'd asked the team to do is to say, let's come up with this bespoke reward program that allows us to market like healthcare for free. So medical insurance, the price point on medical insurance was around 600 Rand. Like, how do we give 600 Rands worth of value on top of promo in our stores, so that we can talk to a message of saying, like, if you're loyal to our brand, like, we'll open up enough money so that you can invest in your healthcare, so you can get healthcare for free, right?
It's really clever.
And we built the program called Extra Rewards, and we kind of incubated it in our stores. So it wouldn't naturally be obvious to every consumer, but if you had a medical insurance product, like, it encouraged certain behaviors. And I mean, when I did it, I expected the impact of that reward program to affect the operating entity that was the insurer. So, you know, in the medical insurance, things like lapse, like debit order strike, consistency and persistency are a problem. You know, like, people will be on the program until they can't afford it, then their debit order doesn't strike, and then you lose them. And I expected the improvements to be there because like you were offering value every single month in the way that you were structuring this reward program, and it did. But what it also did is it changed the behavior of that individual with the brand. So like we saw that individual who had that reward program come into our stores 5 times more a year, because they weren't able to access those products on the program at any better price in South African retail. So in there, we were like, well, this is a fundamentally different take on rewards. What if we open this up to the 10 million people on our base? And that was kind of the idea behind Better Rewards, which we launched in October. And Better Rewards is a deep stackable discount that attaches itself to a product which may or may not be on promotion. So the reward is on top of promotion. And I mean, we're only a month in, but like it's amazing to see what it does to consumers' behavior, right? Like, if you think about a commoditized item in South African retail, like a nappy, nappies are promoted in every channel at the same price point every weekend of the year. Suddenly you're starting to get 20% discount on top of that. Like you're only going to buy your nappy at one place, right?
Customers are discerning, they understand value. You've obviously appealed to something on that value chain that says, this is someone who's looking after me, I'm going to go and support them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like there's the reason why rewards is so important is because I do see it sitting at the center of our ecosystem. Like it is the one thing that you can build. So rewards, everyone understands. It can encourage call to actions. Those call to actions can then influence health outcomes. So one of the things that we've built in our reward program is this concept of a pharmacy boost, right? So like you touch our pharmacy, we give you an extra 5% on the front shop products on our program. And the thing that it immediately does is it like will drive chronic adherence. Now, I'm now getting value if I go and take my chronic medication. Perceptively, I'm only getting value because I want 15% instead of 10% off on my shampoo. But the truth is I've actually improved my health because now I've touched my chronic adherence cycle every single month. So like when you start to think about a reward program through that lens, it changes the way that like South African retail thinks about rewards. It's not ancillary. It's not there just because everyone else has a reward program. It's there to do a specific job. Yeah, so that's been quite interesting.
That's very clever. It's kind of feeding that whole ecosystem. What are the things that you worry about as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I worry about a lot of things. I mean, if I had to, like, I always ask myself, like, what are the macro type risks? Like, I think, like South Africa, like you can get caught up in the macro type risks. So I try, and it's very difficult to describe, but I try and live in this world of like risks that are slightly elevated of the industry, but slightly under South Africa. Like, I mean, you've got to take a punt on South Africa if you're a business and if you're an entrepreneur in this space, right? There's lots of opportunity, many data points that talk about, I mean, if you think about like healthcare delivery in South Africa, there's a huge opportunity. Like it's underserviced. There's lots of earning capacity to pay for healthcare. It's prioritized in everyone's kind of wallet, like huge opportunity. So is there a macro risk at a country level, like in terms of GDP? It is what it is. Of course there is, but it doesn't influence your opportunity. I guess the next level down is to say, is there industry risk? Like, is there anything in the industry that prevents me from doing what I intend to do with the ecosystem? And that's generally where my worry sits. Like the concept of an exemption framework around medical insurance. Like, why is the regulator, are you not allowing more people to play in the medical insurance environment? Allow the South African consumer to understand this market, to benefit from this market. That's a risk only because it doesn't allow us, to deliver on our ambition. So when I worry, typically I worry at that layer, if that makes sense. Like
the things that you can
the controllables, right? The controllables of the industry. And I mean every day there's something else that you deal with, but like the bigger worry is more that that's kind of the things I focus on.
You sound like an optimist at heart.
I'm very optimistic at heart. I am.
And if I go right back to the beginning of your story, there'll be some young up and coming CAs watching this. What are the lessons that you would want to pass on to them to go and say, hey, young CA, pay attention to the following, do this, do that?
I mean, I think for me, Look, I think if you've gone the CEO route, I think that the decision is wise. Like, I mean, I was actually I was criticized on LinkedIn for saying I'm a recovering accountant, which was not the intention. But what I meant by that is like, it gives you the ability to put yourself in decision-making situations so much sooner than what I think is any other profession.
Yeah.
Because naturally, your ability to reconcile commercial decisions to the consequences of those decisions, which are numbers, is what you do, right? So the first thing I would suggest to anyone who wants to live in the commercial space is like understand what a number means. And it sounds like a very silly thing, but there's a lot of power in understanding the consequence of a decision and how it reflects in a number.
Yes.
So like a number is a number, but a number is also insightful in the way that anything is structured. Decision, businesses, relationships between numbers mean certain things. So, and that's a level of thinking that I see less and less of in some of the more junior CAs that I see. And maybe it's a function of the focus on the theory or like understanding what this metric means. The truth is the metric means so much more than that if you actually apply commercial logic, right? And
you've learned the language of accounts, but you've got to interpret it. You've got to
absolutely
know what it means.
Yeah, and that's probably a good way to say it. Like the interpretation of the language is so important because it's such a powerful thing. And certainly as you kind of navigate yourself through your career, the ability to inform like conversations when you can read a number like is super, super powerful. Like I honestly think it's incredibly underestimated. And then the other thing is just it's a personal thing that I try and chase down is like find something that motivates you in your space. For me, it initially was retail. It then became healthcare delivery, and the truth is it's the thing I lean on. When times get very difficult. It is effectively the purpose that you find, and it doesn't always have to be a purpose that you built. In my instance, it was a purpose that I shaped, but that purpose that you find can be anything, whether it's an industry, whether it's a business within an industry, whether it's a brand within a business in an industry. Like once you connect with that thing, I think that natural motivation just kind of forces you to be a better version of yourself in the role that you play. And then I guess the last thing is, for me, I've always held myself accountable to what I believe I'm able to achieve. So, I mean, I think when I was 16, maybe a bit younger, I wrote a very, very, very like a nerdy quote down that said, success, sometimes I forget it, but it had to do with like success is the realization of your opinion of your own ability.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool for a 14-year-old. But the truth is, what it tells you is it's like, everyone's got a perception of success. But to me, success is, it's not an award. It's like, am I comfortable that I'm realizing the ability that I know that I have?
Yes.
Like if you're able to
true to myself.
Yeah, if you're able to realize that, if you can honestly look at yourself and say, that there's like I've achieved to the ability that I have, then that's cool. Like that to me is also a motivator. Like just to keep pushing, into what I think I'm able to achieve. Other than that, like there's always this element of work hard, but everyone does that. So.
Roy, I mean, anyone who's listened to this will have picked up your passion instantly, your passion for business, your passion for everything. I know even in you're a fitness fanatic as well. You apply that in your personal life as much as you do in your business life.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Privateers podcast, and you've shared so many valuable lessons, particularly around the succession issue. It's a topic that a lot of founders struggle with, and between you and Ivan, you got it right, and congratulations on that. But thank you very much for joining us on Privateers.
Thank you for having me. One day I'm going to write a book with Ivan about succession. We have some interesting stories.
It would be a bestseller.
No, it would be super interesting. We have some interesting stories. Thanks very much, Oliver. Thank you.